Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the Our Connections Fall Series number 4. We'll give everyone a few seconds here to join us. You're going to hear from Professor Mockridge today.
Oh.
Again, welcome to today's webinar. We're excited to have Professor Mockridge with us. I would say a classic Ripon College faculty member, someone we all look up to and think highly of, and has decades of followings of students and alumni. So we're excited to have her. I'm gonna let everyone get a jump on here. Again, we're happy to have everyone here for the webinar today. Again, it's our 4th issue of the fall series, which has really been focused on academics and discussion of really what living and learning in college is like right now on campus, particularly with the Catalyst curriculum, virtual learning, and a new Dean of Faculty. Dr. Sisko is with us again this week, so we're excited about that. Again, today use the Q&A function if you have any real-time questions for Dr. Mockridge and Dr. Sisko. We'll continue to monitor that. We've gotten several questions ahead of time, so we'll try to incorporate those as well. Again, I have the honor of introducing Dean Sisko. He's our Dean of Faculty, and when we first started the series this fall, he'd been here all of 2 weeks. Now we're in month 3, we're moving ahead. It's turning into winter time. He's getting accustomed to the weather. Again, he's a vice president and dean of faculty. We're excited to have him here. Just prior to this, he was at Queen's University in North Carolina and has over 20 years of experience at Temple, College of William and Mary, and the College of New Jersey. He's a graduate of St. John's College and has his graduate degree in philosophy from Rutgers. The interesting thing, and John is a great academic because he always likes to tie in his background with whatever our other faculty are discussing. And today he says he has a specialist in ancient Greek philosophy. So he enjoys this history side of the discussion and the role playing and the history of thought. So we'll jump into that together. John's spouse, Karen, is an archivist, and their daughter, Adriana, is completing her PhD currently in women and gender studies. So we're excited to have you guys both here today. And John, why don't you introduce Diane for us?
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Happy to introduce Diane. Dr. Mockridge grew up outside of New York City, had her undergraduate degree in medieval studies at City College and her PhD from Duke University in medieval history. Her area of expertise is medieval hagiography. And for those who've forgotten their ancient Greek, that means writing about the holy, or saints' lives, I presume, mostly, and that sort of thing. She taught for a couple of years at North Carolina State, but is in her 39th year teaching at Ripon, focusing on ancient medieval and Renaissance history. She's led study abroad programs to Florence, to the south of France, and 6 times running, sometimes with President Massetti, a study abroad program in Rome that was disrupted this past year because of COVID. So she's using these interactive games in her classroom right now, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Diane.
Hi, everybody. I think you just heard my cat who's on my lap, a very vocal Siamese. Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to join you all, and I'm really excited that so many of my former students are joining us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've done over my last sabbatical, which was working on developing this new course. So last semester, I had the opportunity to create a new course that I called the same as this webinar, Playing in the Past, Understanding History Through Interactive Games. And the course consisted of 3 games that were part of a series of immersive role-playing games that are called Reacting to the Past. So it's a consortium, actually, that's been in existence now for about 20 years. I'm going to just call them now reacting games. But these first reacting games were developed at Barnard College by Professor Mark Carnes. Since that time, there's been about 30 published games, all by professors in their field of expertise. So these games are written and developed by people who know their stuff. And now they're used in over 300 colleges and universities. So many of you, my former students, have participated in my mock trials, my mock historical trials that I created over the years based on medieval and early modern primary sources. As you know, they only lasted a day or two. We do a day or two of prep and then 1 day of the trial. Reacting games are like my mock trials on steroids. They are just an amazing experience. I've really gotten into them, and I'll explain some of the reasons why I'm so into it. But let me first tell you just a little bit about my experience of playing the games. I'll tell you how they work, then my experience this past semester and this semester, doing it both in person and online, and then a bit about the pedagogy of why I think that this is really an effective way to teach. So reacting games are elaborate games. They're set in the past at key turning points in history. And students are assigned roles, most of which are based on real historical people. And the games require that students read really important primary sources from the time period, these classic texts in the history of ideas. And reacting roles, unlike those in a play, are not scripted. So the outcome, while students have to supposed to adhere to the philosophical and intellectual beliefs of that historical person to which they've been assigned to play, they have to devise their own means of expressing those ideas persuasively. So they do that in speeches and papers and in debates. Another key thing is they can't do this alone. They work in factions. So there's these tight-knit groups that have fixed objectives. So to win the game, and it is competitive and they get bonus points for winning, it affects their grade. To win the game, they have to achieve both the objectives of the faction and also their own secret, oftentimes, individual agendas that they get on these roll sheets. So collaboration and coalition building are at the heart of every game. The student just can't win a game on their own. Discussions within factions, inside and outside of class, as you'll see in a minute, must lead to some kind of action. And what that means in the classroom is that they're going to be proposing and debating and then passing legislation. And this will be over a series of days. The class sessions are entirely run by the students. I'm the game master. I sit in the back. I'm at the back of the class in a corner. I am obviously watching and listening, but I don't do much. It's really up to the students to pull this off. And I give them advice in terms of in and after, after class, certainly emailing extensively with them, office hours, etc. And I grade their papers and their speeches. But, other than sitting in the back, I occasionally will pass a note to a student to encourage them. I also love giving out what they call PIPs, I think they're just bonus points. I forget what it actually stands for right now. Personal influence points, that's what it is. And I would, after a speech, kind of run down the classroom and hand one of these, often poker chips, to a student to indicate that they had just done an awesome job. And sometimes I do devilish things like I announce that a plague has hit Athens and that interrupts the game. And all of these are part of my role-playing book. So I know at different points when I'm going to interrupt the game and put a real aspect of chance into the game that they don't know about. So the typical game will last 3 or 4 weeks. Class meetings before the game are where I would provide more historical context, help them with the major text that they're already reading, and talk about some of the intellectual issues of the game. And then again, there's usually, at least a dozen sessions where the game actually is going on. And then after the game is over, there's usually a week-long period of what we call the postmortem phase, which will be very appropriate as you'll see about the Black Death game, but a postmortem phase where the historical record is set straight. So the first game that we played last semester, I'll tell you a little bit about the 3 games that I played, 2 in person and 1 online last semester. So the first game was set in ancient Athens, and it was after the city had been defeated by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. So it was a key moment when Athenians, as many of you know, were debating what type of government they wanted. And there were 4 factions in this game. There were radical Democrats, moderate Democrats, oligarchs, and the followers of Socrates. And as I said, these are tight-knit factions with fixed objectives. So finding a person to persuade is difficult, but fortunately in every game, there are people that are called indeterminates. They are undecided on certain issues. So the role of every student in a faction is to persuade those indeterminates to vote with them. The factions are pretty equally divided in terms of, in an ideal world, in any class, you're going to have exact numbers the same in terms of each faction. And you can pretty much know that on any given issue, they're going to split pretty evenly on that issue. So that's where the role of the indeterminates, who have a lot of power, quite frankly, in the game. They don't always realize it at first because they feel like their role is kind of diminished. But in fact, they're the people that are going to decide the game with their votes. So the game has, any game will have predetermined issues for debate. Again, this is all in the published book that's available for students, and a separate one for me. So there's predetermined issues for debate. And in this game on Athens, it included hot topics like immigration, the political status of immigrants in the city of Athens, and same with non-citizens, the right to free speech, and the merits of democracy. So needless to say, this game and all reacting games include really relevant issues that we continue to debate today. The students did a great job reading and understanding Plato's Republic. They read almost all of it, which is amazing, and other texts. I'm very happy to report that in that game, democracy prevailed, yay! And Socrates was not condemned to drink the hemlock. The second game that we played in the classroom, again, this is last semester, spring semester, was a game that I played both with that course, and then I also introduced it just as a single game, as a single unit in my Catalyst class. And that one centered on the heresy trial of Joan of Arc. The primary sources included a good chunk of her actual trial record, but also two really incredibly difficult theological texts, one by John Gerson and the other by St. Thomas Aquinas. So I was a bit nervous, particularly with the Catalyst class, sophomores, asking them to read this, but I was amazed and delighted that the students mastered the text and made really sophisticated arguments about heresy throughout the game. And really interesting, and this was the same time in terms of just as it worked out in the semester, these two classes are playing the same game. They came up with totally different verdicts. So my Catalyst class found her innocent and sent her back to do re mi, while my playing in the past class found her guilty and burned her at the stake. And the main reason why she died in that second class was because of a really clever move by a student playing the role of Bishop Causation. Some of you know the trial. He's the chief inquisitor who was determined to burn her at the stake. And he did that by blocking the key testimony of a student from another faction who was about to make a really persuasive argument about allowing eyewitness testimony into the trial. And students, by the way, post their speeches the night before on the web. So everybody gets a chance to read those speeches, everybody gets a chance to think about them and react to them and know what they want to say the next day to break that down. So the rules of this particular game allowed Causation, the bishop, the extraordinary power just once in the entire game to stop one student from speaking that day. And he picked that student because he knew, he had read, obviously, the night before, her remarkable speech. And that student happened to be, in real life, his girlfriend. Not to worry, they're still in a committed relationship a year later, but the class, who all knew this, exploded over that move. And it was such a brilliant move on his part, because by denying the chance of eyewitness testimony in that trial, Joan didn't have a chance. So they burned her. Okay, the third game was supposed to be a game actually set in Renaissance Florence and centered on the Medici rule. But that is when the pandemic hit. So I had to think quickly, and fortunately there's a wonderful Facebook page for professors teaching reacting games. And so I quickly went there and saw that there are some online games that have been available for a while. And one online game just happened to be The Black Death Comes to Norwich. So on the last day before we stopped teaching in person, I asked the class, are they okay with making the switch? I knew I couldn't do the Renaissance Florence one online, and just wanted to know, could they handle this? Is it hitting too close to home? They were so enthused about it. So they were totally in and said, yes, we are happy to play this game online. So the issues that we debated were just absolutely incredibly relevant in terms of what was going on in our real lives as we debated this game. So the students in their posts, so we obviously, instead of doing face-to-face speeches, the students would post on a discussion board on these different topics that we were debating for this game. And the posts on their websites just took material just straight out of the daily headlines. The factions would argue issues like, should they close the city gates and quarantine the city and thereby severely hurt the economy of the city of Norwich? The medical faction and the church faction on that particular issue prevailed and the gates were closed. But in this game, the tradesmen, and in particular a butcher who collaborated with a baker, managed to bring the city to its knees by closing their shops in protest and threatening the city with starvation for all but their own families. The city council revisited that earlier legislation and voted to reopen the gates. But unfortunately, the bubonic plague continued to ravage the city throughout the game. And in fact, every week on Fridays, I would play the Grim Reaper and I would spin a wheel, and the result was a third of the class would die every Friday. What would happen at that point was that the students would get reincarnated as another role, but that reincarnated role had way less power. They had no political power as the wife of a tradesperson, as the widow of a tradesperson, as an apprentice. They had no voice and they could not vote. So without voting, the city came to a standstill. They were unable to pass effective legislation and life in the city just got too chaotic. And that's how the game ended. And there's obviously a lot of parallels you can make in terms of what happens to a city when you're in a pandemic and basic functions start shutting down. So their postmortem PowerPoints really reflected the grim realities of the devastation of the bubonic plague of 1348. So the reason, so that was a little bit about those three games that I played. The reason why I'm really hooked on this method of teaching is that it develops so many key skills that we emphasize at Ripon College: persuasive writing, public speaking, critical thinking, problem solving, teamwork, negotiation, changing to adapting circumstances, and working under pressure to meet deadlines. And my students worked on these skills, frankly, every single day of the semester as they did this course. And they did say it was more work than any course they had ever been in. They immediately said, you can't have this as a 100 level course. You need to change the number. So it's now a 200 level course. But they did all of this with real gusto and enthusiasm. For example, in a regular class where sometimes you'd have to prod students to participate in class discussions, or discussions might really depend on the contributions of a few key students. In a reacting class, everyone participates. They have to. And in fact, my class was scheduled for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the last semester one, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2:30 to 3:40. But the students, and again, they're in charge, they insisted that on game days, we had to stay till 4. Nobody could leave before 4. And it often went longer than that. And the reason why they needed the extra time was because of this podium rule that exists in all games. And what that means is that each student is required to give at least one longer speech on a certain day of the game, but anyone can respond to it. If you want to respond, you form a line along the wall and you wait for your turn to go to the podium. So the students being in charge of the classroom, I said, you figure this out. And they agreed that anyone who got online before the class ended had the right to be heard that day. And since the speeches were published the night before, again, as I said, I required them to post their speeches so everybody could read them. I had originally set a deadline at 5 o'clock the day before, but they all argued and I said, you're in charge. And they said, okay, we're setting it at midnight. So they set it at midnight and then literally, and I couldn't believe they told me this afterwards, I didn't totally get that they were doing this. But they all agreed as factions to force everyone to read everybody's stuff at midnight. And then they would be starting IMing each other. And, they weren't Zooming then, but they were, anyway, they were all meeting at, like 12:30 at night to go over strategies of how they were going to respond to the speeches that were posted that night. So what always happened is we get back in the classroom, the set speeches would start in terms of who's supposed to speak. And then there'd be 10 students on a line against the wall waiting to get up to the podium to have a turn to respond to that speech or just extemporaneously respond to the response that they had just heard. So it gave me literally goosebumps to be in a classroom where they just couldn't wait to talk and they wouldn't stop talking at 4. They just wanted to keep debating each other. So it was just fabulous. The Reacting the Past games have gotten a lot of awards. I want to tell you a little bit about just kind of pedagogically why I think this does work so well. They've gotten a ton of awards for inventing this type of method in the classroom. And obviously professors are endorsing this method by incorporating these games into their classes. And the research that's been done on the pedagogy basically cites a number of key features that are attractive to students. Certainly the idea that you escape from yourself into persona. I think that's particularly important for our students that might be first years or second years and really unsure of themselves, and again, not as willing to talk in class, that they can just escape into this persona and be somebody else. It's also fun to have a competition. Students like having competitions, we all do, particularly winning a competition. Students really feel empowered by this in terms of, again, they're in charge. They get completely flustered and confused the first couple of days when I'm in the back not responding, just saying, nope, you figure it out. But they do feel empowered by the end of the game for sure. They also bond with other students in their faction and team, so much so that they continue to call each other that persona's name when they bump into them on campus later on. I think they also enjoy it because people vicariously like to engage with the past and also this kind of liminal experience that they're going through in the moment. For me, it's a really great way to teach. It's super exciting. As I said, I got goosebumps a lot of time, particularly with the Joan of Arc trials. I just couldn't wait to get in and figure out how they were going to vote. It's also exhausting. You have to really keep up with grading the papers and the speeches immediately. You have to turn them over within 24 hours because after we've discussed an issue, they're on to the next one and they're writing their papers and working on their speeches. So you have to give them feedback immediately. But I have to say, despite the enormous amount of work, it really has been one of the most satisfying experiences that I've had in my 39 years of teaching at Ripon College. So what I want to do to end this is I just want to play you 2 minutes of a speech that a student gave from last semester while we were playing a Black Death game, just to give an example of what can happen. So this student, he was an actor, so he is definitely using his acting ability as well. But please remember that he just has a small role, just a little bit of information about this person that he's got on a roll sheet, and he's read primary sources, but he's made this all up. So this is totally Jamie Malik, who graduated last year. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully this will work. Okay. Hang on. Okay, I'm trying to get to the controls to let me share my screen. There we are. Okay. Oops, one more button to push. Sorry. Okay, here's Jamie Malik.
Greetings, greetings, blessings and salutations to you all. I am Monk Benedict of the Benedictine Order, servant of his most holy Lord, and shepherd of his flock after the passing of our most noble Bishop of Norwich. I come to you today in the hopes of guiding you along his most sacred path. And to do so, I believe it is vital that we increase religious attendance. Of course, in a perfect world free of sin, all of you would already be doing these things, like attending Mass or attending festivities in praise of our Lord or praising his name in your private lives, as these are all things which are already your duties as Christians. But in such trying times like these, when the devil uses utmost guile to wrap his claws around all of Norwich, we must not only reaffirm ourselves and adhere to the normal duties we are given as children of the Lord, but so too must we rise above our station and attempt our utmost to become the souls of goodness and purity which our Lord believes we can come. For in these dark times, an exemplary effort is needed to lift ourselves out of said darkness, as this is not only a time of great peril and suffering, but it is a time of suffering that has been brought about by our own complacency in showing our faith. Indeed, I am not alone in believing this, for the Archbishop of York wrote something quite similar in a letter of his last year. In it, he said, This is surely caused by the sins of men who, while enjoying good times, forget that such things are the gifts of the Most High Giver.
So I just wanted to give you a little taste of that, up to the point where he was citing from a primary source. And again, he was definitely using his acting abilities there. But Jamie just did an awesome job throughout the entire semester in playing his roles. So that was the what I wanted to share with you today. I think we're going to go to question and answer now.
Sounds awesome.
Diane.
I appreciate you sharing that, Diane, and great chatter in the chat function between your former students and others who didn't have the pleasure of learning from you, but talking about what they've heard about this field and things they're interested in. And I definitely think there's some opportunity for us to explore more of these options and how to engage, especially virtually, with others in this learning experience, which is wonderful. So I'll turn it over to you, Dean Sisko, and get us started on some questions. We have a few in the queue and several submitted ahead.
We have several questions. I think I'll start with Nathan Davidson, class of 14. Isn't there an inherent risk that historical games put students into a position of bringing their present day bias and perceptions into a game and possibly influencing how they play the game? What is the role of contemporary bias in these games?
It's a really great question. Hi, Nate. Thanks for asking it. So enjoyed you as a student. So I agree that is an issue in terms of that students can't but bring in their own present day bias. And that certainly came out with the Black Death game while we were living it, right? You know, the exact same questions of to what degree do you shut the city down, hurt the economy, but help the people's health. So what's interesting that happens, though, is ironically, they really do take on the persona of that person that they're playing. That, in fact, in some ways, the opposite happens. Sometimes, a lot of times, I should say, as other faculty report, students have a hard time giving up that role. So even at the end, when I made them vote, just, you know, the game of the trial was over in terms of Joan of Arc. Okay, you killed her. And then you ask the students, and they vote exactly the same way in their factions. So even though people that you know that it was crazy that she was burned at the stake, they still voted to burn her. It's just like, what? So they do tend to take on the biases of their historical figure, which I had not anticipated, but was an amazing thing. It's also a good way to get, you know, if you assign roles to students that are against what their beliefs are, you have to do it carefully, but it also serves the function of allowing them to think more about their own personal biases too, by inhabiting the bias of somebody else. So I do think, sorry, go ahead.
Diane, how do you decide which role? You decide that as the teacher, which role they get? And so you think about what you know or don't know about the student? Do they get a choice or these are my preferences? How does it work?
That's a really good question. So again, I'm just using best practices from what I learned. I both did a week-long workshop in New York, playing the games myself, so I understood them, but also learning the techniques and getting all these tips. So what I do is I give them a survey at the beginning of the class that asks some questions like comfort level. Are you comfortable, you know, having a major role in this trial, in this game? Also ask them, you know, who do you want to be on your team? Who do you not? So more I'd ask it, is there anybody that you definitely don't want to be with? With that class, ironically, that had the girlfriend and the boyfriend, there were two couples in that class. One couple said, we have to be on the same faction. We can't be against each other. But the couple that I just said, where he did that brilliant move, they had already said in advance, they don't care, that they're happy to, and there were two groups of siblings as well. So it was really interesting in terms of just personal dynamics. So part of that, I let them express what they want.
Sure.
But with a game, with a course that goes on for 3 games, what I did, and I told them in advance, is, okay, I'll respect your opinion on the first game, and I won't give you a major role if you feel uncomfortable. But then, following game, I would give that person a big role and make that person who just played a big role an indeterminate. So you just keep switching it up. Otherwise, the class would depend too much on certain personalities.
Yeah, and what's the class size then that goes along with this?
Yeah, so they really should be not smaller than 12.
Okay.
And then they can go up to about 33. So the Joan of Arc game could have accommodated up to 33 people.
Okay.
It was actually a Catalyst class, and I combined it. Ann plus Morris taught with me that particular course, but we divided up the games once we realized it wasn't, so I did the Joan of Arc game, her students watched, and we kind of broke the rules a little bit, but we allowed the students at the end, all her students, to be the jury and vote, basically. So they got a chance to vote, and they participated. I mean, they were into it. Nobody missed that class. Oh boy, everybody.
Everyone's in class all the time.
Participate in that.
Diane,
But
did
probably 30's the most.
Okay.
Diane, did the students ever bring in props or costumes or
Yeah.
anything like that?
Yeah. So, I managed to get to Michael's before the pandemic really, at the beginning of the class. So I had an owl for Athena who presided over the class. I always borrowed costumes from the theater department. So yeah, so props. And I had to have, I had 2 little piggy banks for putting in, for any Athenian vote, they had to put in black and white pebbles into a piggy bank to decide how the vote went. So, and then, there's die rolling to determine different things that happen as well. So there's all sorts of twists, and definitely the props help.
Nice. That's how black and white pebbles, how in ancient Greece, in Athens, they assigned political roles. Every year, the citizens would come up to a little machine and pull out a pebble, and you pull out a white pebble, you're like a senator for a year, right? It's a radical democracy.
And we didn't do this, but in that game of ancient Athens, you can also do ostracism. So that the boyfriend-girlfriend situation could have happened in the first game where they could have ostracized an important player. So.
Nice, nice. I have a question from Mark Kraus, 2019. How do you ensure that gamification strategies remain a tool that buttresses your teaching rather than becoming a distraction for your students?
Yeah. Hi, Mark. Great to hear from you. Yeah. I do think that can be an issue. For me, what I found is that the skills of the class are so integrated into the game that for me, they're acquiring so many skills, but they're having fun doing it that I don't see a separation there. I don't see it as a game that they're just doing. I see it as fundamental to the actual class. And then on top of this, they're learning obviously a ton of content. I can't remember, somebody had also pre-asked about the issue of, well, what if they get history wrong? And they do. So the point is, at the end of it, you have a postmortem session where you clean up the historical record and explain what actually happened. But in fact, I kind of like it when they get it wrong, because you can really talk about the issue of causation in history when it goes askew. And I personally think, even though I definitely adhere to this as a historian, I really talk about big causes, right? When you talk about things that happened, whether it is, the Peloponnesian War and what caused it. I think people get too far away from individuals making a difference in history. And for students in playing these games, they suddenly see what a difference one person can make. So to me, that's okay, that even though that, it is a what if question, the games are basically what ifs, and they're getting the opportunity to see a different form of history that might have happened with an individual playing a certain role differently or persuading people better or whatever. So for me, Mark, I really think that it is so part of the course. It's not a game, it's the course.
Nice answer. I have another question from Edward Palmer, class of 2000. Do interactive games work better with certain time periods or topics in history?
Yeah, and I don't think I had the privilege of having you as a student, Ed, but thanks for a great question there. For the most part, people do pick real key turning points in history. And I'm happy to share with people the URL for the Reacting to the Past website, and shows the 30 published games that are available now. And I should point out, they're not all history. So a bunch of them there's some art history, there's even science stuff. So there's a wonderful game that I'd love to play on the trial of Galileo, that the texts are actually scientific texts and philosophical texts, not straight history texts. So there's a move now, there's a bunch of games that'll be coming up that are going to be STEM games as well. But I think with any of them, they do require a moment of controversy. You need something where people are going to have radically different opinions about something. You also need a situation that's complex. So what I love about the games that I played is it wasn't just, again, an either or situation. In discussing these ideas by Plato, you had to understand the social, the economic, the political, the cultural aspects of Athenian life to understand how you're going to go in any direction as a persona at that time period. So definitely takes a key moment in time to make it work.
Nice, very good. It's interesting. I'm sure the Galileo would be fascinating with the letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, or some of his observations about the moons of Jupiter. Very exciting stuff. Period. Big turning point, really, in the history of science. Do we have any questions in the queue?
Yeah, quite a few, and a lot of it is about the kind of how things work. And a question from Katie Pfeffer. What was the favorite game that you played in the workshop when you were doing all the training, Diane? You got to really take everything. And what did you have the most fun doing?
Sure. So they do a real attenuated version, obviously. So these games in real life will go on 3-4 weeks, but in a week-long workshop, newbies like me get to play 2 games, and it's over a 2-day period each. So I played the Athens game, and I played one on Renaissance Florence, not the one I was going to play, but actually one on building the dome, of Brunelleschi's dome. So that was a good way to incorporate art history. I decided against that one just because it was still really in development. But with the Athens game, that was my most fun playing, but it was partly because, this is pretty funny. So you do this kind of preliminary game before the main game starts. And I was a little bit bummed, I have to say. I was assigned the role of a slave girl. So I knew immediately, 1, I can't vote, 2, I can't speak. So I'm sitting there thinking, oh boy, I've come all the way to New York, and here I am going to be a slave girl. So I'm just going to watch what happens around me. Well, no, I get killed off almost immediately of the plague. And then Mark Carnes, the developer of the whole program and who's leading this institute, and it's his game that he invented, slips me a note and says, meet me in the hallway, you've been reincarnated. So I'm reincarnated as the general of Sparta, the most important role of the entire game. And there I am having to work with the other factions. I've got men from Carthage that I've got to convince on my side. Anyway, I won the game. I thought it was awesome.
Winning goes a long way.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really, I totally understood in that moment how students could get into it and how the competition of it does. And I don't consider myself a competitive person, but I was like, wow, this is so great that I won.
It's super interesting because, right, the up and down of, right, you think, oh, this is what I'm destined to be. And then, nope, change of plans. And you really have to shift your mindset and understanding and put yourself in a different place, which I imagine for students can be exciting and exhilarating and also terrifying all at the same time, but in a good way.
And their emotional reactions were really interesting. So particularly in that catalyst class, the side that was trying to save Joan got really, really close, and they were just constantly in touch, and they'd sit together in the classroom too. But boy, I mean, the electricity in that classroom on the day that the decision was going to be made, where again, they were spontaneously just going up to the podium and kept talking to make sure that they were going to win it and convince them. When the verdict came down that they won, they just exploded. I mean, they were high-fiving and they were hugging each other, and it was just, and I was the same way. I mean, I was just so nervous about what was going to happen and so excited to find the answer. So it was just awesome in terms of what happened in the classroom.
That's great. Diane, I have a question from Mike on the chat. Games are self-adjudicated. Winning is determined by the faction that gains the maximum number of votes. Is there any room for like empire adjudication? Are there any times you need to jump in and sort of say, hey, that went away, it shouldn't have gone?
Yeah. So in terms of who wins the game, what I make the students do, because at first I was like, oh my goodness, am I going to have to figure out, because every single student has a different role, and each role spells out, again, what their objective is, their personal objective. Again, some of them have some secret agendas where they're a little bit more indeterminate than the faction realizes. So there's lots of variables. So I made them at the end of the game email me and say, do you think you won? You know, so give me your justification of why I should give you the extra points. So some of it is just in terms of winning the game, partly their ability to persuade me that not only, and I know whether their faction won or not, but their ability to persuade me whether they won their individual objectives or not. And I didn't do it just black, white, you know, you had to win it totally or not. No, so a student who overwhelmingly had more in the winning column, I gave them the win. But yeah, so fortunately, none of my games fell apart. But when you go to the faculty website, there are cases where games kind of just get stopped in terms of students not getting into it as much as they could, just things going off the rails a bit. And then faculty members do have to jump in, and there's ways, I mean, there's radical ways you can switch things, like reassigning roles. Again, just killing off a person, reassigning them, and switching roles entirely up on them. So there's things you can do. I haven't fortunately had to do that.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Good. I think I was just wondering too, if, and this sort of relates to the current situation, right? You had intended for this class to be in person last semester, and obviously that had to change really on the fly. And now you're incorporating this in your virtual classroom now. How has that gone, and what's the sense of the student level? So, right, you think, oh, in person, that's no problem to be connected and engaged, and really physically you're together and you're working on this. When you're virtual, right, you're all talking in a different kind of space. What have you seen from the students?
Yeah, no, really good question. So I was really fortunate in having 2 games down in person before going online with that third game of the Black Death. And they were into it and they did an excellent job. So, you know, the switch from being in the classroom, it was disappointing, but boy, did they do a good job. I had never used a discussion thread on the internet before on a website. And this was our old LMS, and they did an excellent job posting comments and then replies. And I could see, as professor, how many they had read, how much time they put in. I mean, so it was wonderful for me as a way of monitoring what they were doing. But this semester, I am doing this Black Death game again right now with my Catalyst class, and they have not been the most engaged class I've ever had of teaching, because it's this semester, you know, it's a difficult semester and they're sophomores. But they're doing an awesome job. So I've been really pleased with the comments they make. And then they're able, with our new Canvas, yay, LMS system, they're able to actually record their speeches just in the discussion. So they're in the discussion and typing a comment, and they can hit a record button and they can just do it as a speech. So it's been really integrated seamlessly, and they are into this game. So I've been happy with that.
That's a great kind of understanding of how things can adjust and change and still get basically the same outcome. Obviously, it's not maybe as fun as you would like, but that students can do it in different ways and others can learn it, and they're not missing out on something they were really looking forward to. Because I can imagine this is a class students get excited to sign up for and excited to take, and then that word kind of spreads through the department and through that, hey, you should take this class, it's really fun, and right, it's not just a lecture class or something like that. So good. I think, any final comments or questions that you want to address before we kind of wrap things up?
Just give a big hug to all my former students out there. Miss everybody. So thanks.
Yes, I think I've already got them all on board, Diane, to figure out how we can make this work as some kind of an alumni game or event that maybe culminates at something like an alumni weekend, things we could do, you know, stay connected. And a few of them were already saying, sign me up for that, which is great. So again, this is a great way. I'm really excited that you were able to participate today, Dr. Mockridge, because I knew you'd get a great following of participants and people who wanted to see you and talk to you specifically about what you're doing now, and, you know, kind of reminisce about their time with you as well. And it's a great way to end our fall, our Connections series, and kind of capstone really a great overview this semester about academics on campus and what things look like for our students, both virtually and in person, and how our faculty are really dealing with all these changes. So I'll be in touch with you, Diane. We'll figure out how that can work. And I think I saw John say, yeah, we're going to think about how to do some more of these interdisciplinary games across areas, because there's amazing ways to connect our students, again, virtually or in person, and lots of topics that our faculty could get on board with, which is wonderful. So we'll be back in 2021 for our next Our Connections series. I don't know what the topic will be yet. We'll start thinking about how to stay connected virtually over the spring semester and continue to share information with our parents and our alumni and connect with faculty and each other as well. So I appreciate you guys so much, and that we had some great chatter today. And I'll send a follow-up with the recording and details for everyone if you want to rewatch or learn more about reacting to the past.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
No, that was great fun.